We are live. Thank you, Team Certified. We are live once again. Today I wanted to make a video and some content about a systems-based approach to Jiu Jitsu. For those who have followed over the years, especially after he went on the Joe Rogan podcast, John Danaher, he actually makes an offhand comment and talks about what is the difference between a systems-based approach, which is what he teaches, versus other approaches to Jiu Jitsu. He talks about how he doesn't want to go into at the time talking about systems because the discussion itself is rather lengthy. And so I wanted to make a quick video about kind of my philosophy and understanding of a systems-based approach to jiu-jitsu. So I always like to start with definitions. Of course, in the legal field, that's always where us nerds start out. So systems theory is a scientific approach that looks at the analytical and holistic approaches to understanding any area of study that is derived from the summation of the parts of the whole. So the only true way of understanding is to relate something as the parts in the situational application of the whole, which gives it an enhanced understanding, which is differentiated from a reductionist approach. And most jiu-jitsu is taught in a reductionist based theory of application. So those are all kind of like big fancy words, and it's the great thing about jiu-jitsu is it really helps us give context to what we mean by that. So essentially, if you've ever been to a jiu-jitsu course, and I've traveled all over the United States doing jiu-jitsu in many different states at many different academies, and there are very much a reductionist approach to jiu-jitsu. And all that means is they provide you with, so here's our technique of the week. Maybe we're doing Deli Hiva, maybe we're doing knee on belly, maybe we're doing, worm guard, whatever guard system that they're utilizing. And they really just teach the how. This is how you grip. This is how we do cross collar. This is how we exchange grips. This is how we pin, which is truly the reductionist view, is that they go from point to point to point without analyzing the summation of the whole, or essentially not looking at what are the principles and the guiding forces that make these individualized techniques applicable and successful, right? Because there's a lot of moves and things, especially that you see online, that like look cool in drilling, but really aren't applicable when you go to live rolling. And when you have a systems-based approach, I try to contextualize it simply into three main characteristics. Number one is that there are indeed guideposts. There is a start and a finish. There is a beginning line and an end line, much as you would have in a race, right? So whereas you might be going out for a free run someday, and you don't really have a path, you just kind of run as long as you want to. A systems-based approach is much more like a marathon, something that's orchestrated, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a starting point and an ending point, oftentimes looping back upon each other. Number two is that there is the idea of completeness. A system is going to be simple enough for individuals to remember, recall, and implement, but complex enough to work against high-level opponents. This is an intrinsic part of the Danaher system, as well as other jiu-jitsu systems, that essentially it has some founding principles that will be sufficient enough to beat the best in the world, but are going to be simple enough to remember them in real time. You can't have a notepad or instructional videos with you on the mat. So you have to be able to recall the sub parts of the system in real time to apply them in order to have successful outcomes. The third main characteristic when you're looking to a systems-based approach for me is it's self-reinforcing. And what I mean by that is if you get lost, so I always refer to like closed guard as the home base of jiu-jitsu. Like that's where we start out. Most of us don't have much of experience, so you spend a lot of time on your back, so you learn to survive an attack on your back. And so we have an entire systems-based approach, which is here is a sweep, here's a butterfly sweep, a flower sweep, whatever kind of sweep that we have. So we have a sweeping system that moves us in a hierarchy of positions in jiu-jitsu. And so if that system is to fail, or let's say the subset of the moves are to fail, a system has a guiding principle to get us back on track. So if we go off the track, we have a set of guiding principles and techniques that get us back on track to the ultimate path of victory, whether it be via points or most likely submission. So I try to consider myself a submission specialist, so I'm always trying to shoot for the submission. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a system that presents opportunities and self-reinforcing in the finish that I want, which is the submission. And so a true and complete system is going to be more than just the reductionist, here's a move, here's a move, here's a move. If they do this, you do that. It's no, my guiding principle. Let's take, for instance, the Kimura Trap system. So in particular, the Kimura Trap system is based on the fundamental precept, which is if I can take, no matter how big or strong the opponent is, if I can take the front of their wrist and pin it behind their back in this mechanism right here, it creates an impingement, a structural impingement in the scapula joint, which is only meant to go up and down and not in 360 degrees side to side. So that basic understanding is a principle that we apply. And so we build a system, which is 1, 2, and 3, which is self-reinforcing, which is even if you get to, let's say you're on top and you have the Kimura grip and it gets reversed and you're on bottom, we still have a system to ultimately get to the break. So we would have a set of moves or a coupling of moves that would allow us to get the ultimate break in that position. And we would have a system of transitions to move into other attacks should that subsystem fail. So that's been one of the great things about following the Danaher systems over the years is as they've put out new parts of their system, you essentially have individualized complete subsystems that feed into each other, and then they create the greater whole, which would be the systems theory approach analyses of the actual systems. And so Jiu-Jitsu, I always refer to Jiu-Jitsu as the utilization of wedges, fulcrums, and levers through the scientific process in order to break the human body. And so that's what the ultimate systems-based approach is going to do. It's going to be, even if something fails, right? I go for an arm bar and now I'm on bottom and someone gets out of that arm bar. I have an entire system of recovery, getting back to guard, sweeping on top, and going for the Jujigatami or cross pin yet again. So let's take Jujigatami for instance. Part of the Danaher system, and I teach this as well, is Jujigatami literally means cross pin, right? So you have someone flat on their back and you're attacking for the arm bar to create a fulcrum, ultimately to hyperextend or break the joint or tear the ligaments. So in order to do that, you like to have, I said earlier, I refer to closed guard as our home base, but subsystems themselves, which have completeness, also have their own quote unquote home base. And that's the cross pin Jujigatami for the arm bar, where my opponent is flat on his back and I am either hugging the leg or attacking the arms in order to break and get the arm bar. So ultimately, there is a whole system of approach that ends. So it starts with the concept of where's my beginning position. So my beginning position could start anywhere in a dynamic sport like jiu-jitsu. We could start standing, we could start on bottom, we could start in closed guard. And I have a step-by-step self-reinforcing system in order to get to the ultimate cross pin finish. And you know, the true marrying of the systems is how you accelerate in jiu-jitsu is not just trying to memorize move for move for move, but have an intrinsic understanding of what the systems are in jiu-jitsu, what their functions are, and how they apply to the greater game, the umbrella of your jiu-jitsu game. So that's it. Let's take De La Riva or reverse De La Riva, for instance. There are a lot of people who don't play reverse De La Riva. Reverse De La Riva, I think, is a good transitionary period for people who like to play the inversion game, which I have quite a bit myself played. But that's not necessarily for everyone. But just because you don't play that system, if you want to have a true understanding of jiu-jitsu, you want to understand that system so you can shut down people who are trying to be offensive there. So if you have a subsystem for shutting down reverse De La Riva, that's part of the greater system of jiu-jitsu itself. So I view the whole game of jiu-jitsu as one large scale system. So we have an umbrella system, and then we have subsections of the system underneath that umbrella that help direct and focus our attacks in jiu-jitsu. So when you One of the biggest things that I hear from brand new students, I deal with a lot of white belts who started where I started, which was with essentially no martial arts background. They don't have much training in jiu-jitsu, which is really great because they truly are a blank slate, which makes them usually very curious and very open to coaching. The biggest problem that I often hear is, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. And I always come back with the quip, well, what you do is you show up to jiu-jitsu. That's how you get better at jiu-jitsu. That's really the only true secret of the sport, is you have to keep showing up to get better. But more than the flippant answer, I always say, we want to I'm going to set some guidelines and goalposts for you. So when you're like first few days on the mats, your only goal really is truly is to survive. And how do you survive? Is you implement a guard. Well, what is the guard, right? I've heard it talked about 1,000 times, but almost no coach that I've ever gone to has actually defined, well, what the hell is the guard? Give me a definition. Well, the guard in the abstract is just the utilization of the strongest part of my body, the legs, particularly my quads and hamstrings, engaging them in a manner that makes it difficult for my opponent to get on top of me, essentially chest to chest. So the guard is not just me closing and wrapping my legs around someone. That is a descriptive word for it, but that's not the verb action of doing. Like a guard is an active thing. Is I'm guarding against someone getting on top of me and crushing me into oblivion. That's really how I view it and articulate the guard. So you want to understand, okay, now I know why my legs are wrapped around him, because my hips positionally are actually above my opponent's hips, his or her hips, whenever my legs are locked. And so I'm using strategically the strongest parts of my body to keep a bigger, stronger, faster opponent from getting on top of me, and using gravity, their weight, and their technique against me. So that's the beginning part for almost the entirety of the system of jiu-jitsu. But that's just one methodology of jiu-jitsu, right? I mean, jiu-jitsu is just submission-based form of grappling. And so you have people who are wrestlers. And so, really good wrestlers maybe have not much interest in playing in guard. And again, if you want to have a holistic, complete view of a systems theory, is you would still study those parts of the grappling world, even if you don't have any vested interest in using them in the future. Not everyone's going to do spinny berimbolo, upside down, inverted, cool, tricky Minari rolls. Like, that's totally fine. You don't have to implement them, but you should still study them from a systems-based theory approach, because the only way that you understand the holistic system is to understand the subsystems, which is, now if you just think about the names of the techniques as subsystems, that'll start cluing you into how we have an interlink between De La Riva to reverse De La Riva to close guard to half guard to butterfly half guard, right? In my mind, these are all subsystems under the greater umbrella of jiu-jitsu. And having a mastery and understanding of each of those subsystems is insufficient to give you the true understanding of jiu-jitsu if you just evaluate them in a vacuum. You want to have an actual methodical understanding of both the how and the why, and have that utilization create guiding principles that ultimately lead you to a desired outcome or a desired destination. I say this all the time in class, and I've said it in my instructional videos. One of the best tips that I've picked up in all the seminars that I have done come from Jeff Glover. And whatever your opinions of Jeff Glover are, one thing that's undeniable is that he's great at jiu-jitsu. He's been a big influence in the jiu-jitsu world. And I went to a seminar where he taught his deep half guard several years ago here in Washington. But specifically, I remember, he said his road in jiu-jitsu is always on a pathway to your back. And so that can be a type of system, and a very highly effective system in jiu-jitsu, which is, how do I systematically take someone's back and then choke them out from that position? That's by and large what the Danaher systems do. The systems that I teach do is ultimately create back exposure, because humans are mechanically weak at attacking things in our back. And so that's why the highest rate of finishes come from the Monte Leon, the rear naked choke. And, when you have those specific desirable outcomes, you can accelerate your ability to be successful in jiu-jitsu by having these guidelines and these goalposts that are directing your behavior. One of the one of my favorite sayings from law school came from a trial advocacy coach there, where the big thing is they always ask, what's your plan? What's your plan to get something admitted into evidence? What's your plan in discovery? What's your plan? What plan do you have to be an effective counselor? And that's just as true in jiu-jitsu. Is hope is not a plan. That is, hope is not a plan. You should have a specific, articulable plan of action, even if it's abstract and generalized. Having any kind of plan of this is how I'm going to engage and this is my plan of attack is going to be effective. But you also want to have a plan that is not so rigid that it can't deal with new variables. So it has to be a multivariant plan. It has to have a beginning and an end, and it has to have clear pathways to success. So generally speaking, these are the ideas that I implement and teach in certified jiu-jitsu when I'm trying to demonstrate how can you accelerate and quickly grow in jiu-jitsu. This is what I've utilized over the years. I've leveraged my 6 years of higher learning and education, where I graduated law school early, and I've really tried to apply the principles of learning and understanding to my teaching in jiu-jitsu in order to have it help accelerate and have my students learn. And it's been really great and satisfying over the last about year and a half that I've been fully running a program. It's amazing to see people who come in on their very first day and are like, they're worried about being embarrassed and they can't shrimp properly and they don't know what they're doing, to 6, 8, 10 months later, even though they never truly believed in themselves. I just kept saying, hey, show up, do the drills, pick up, even if you're only picking up small pieces of subsystems, if you can understand the why more than the how, that's going to be more effective. And I've seen some really great growth in my students, and it's always really impressive to see people implement systems that I've traveled the world to learn and understand and spend, thousands and thousands of hours studying and drilling and mat time and review and all of the different type of tools that I've had at my disposal, and used those in order to help teach my students. So this has been my kind of my general overview of the discussion of systems-based theory. I hope to have a further discussion with someone in the future about what their concepts are, what they're understanding. Maybe someday I'll be famous enough to actually have a podcast with John Danaher again. But I've worked with him in the past, and he's a really awesome guy. I really do love him both as a person and as a professor. He's done so much for the community and for me. So check out certifiedjiu-jitsu.com. That's where my instructional is. If you're a big fan of John Danaher like I am, you can go and give him some money at, not that he needs it anymore, at BJJ Fanatics. I teach many of his principles to my students along with other world-class people. And, those, I hope you check out those resources. Please leave a comment or subscribe if you'd like to see more content. You can always email me. Check me out on Instagram, Dreaux Fitness, DREAUX Fitness. You can email americancertifiedjiujitsu.com or at gmail.com. Or, you can look me up. I'm on Facebook. And really, if this helps you in any meaningful way, let me know, and I'll try putting out more meaningful content in the future. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. And as always, stay certified.